At the moment, her only specific plan was to spend much of the summer spying on a strikingly unattractive young man she had nicknamed Plaid Pants, who worked at a nearby convenience store. But she didn't want to admit this to Mrs. Weinstock. Remembering that her mother had recently spoken of her eccentric cousin who lived in California, Gilda blurted the first idea that came to mind. "I'm going to San Francisco," she said. Everyone in the room turned to gaze at her with a combination of surprise and curiosity, causing Gilda to immediately regret the impulsive lie. "And what will you be doing there? A vacation with your family?" "I'll be writing a novel." Why did she tell Mrs. Weinstock that? Gilda's pale, freckled complexion turned pink with embarrassment, and Mrs. Weinstock peered at her suspiciously. Gilda had been known to make up stories in the past, and she knew Mrs. Weinstock regarded most of her comments with a degree of skepticism. "Writing a novel is a pretty ambitious plan for a girl your age." Mrs. Weinstock obviously didn't want to believe that an 8th grader could write a novel, even if it was Gilda, who had a unique talent for writing in a voice well beyond her years. In fact, because Gilda had used vocabulary words like specious and trenchant in some of her assignments, Mrs. Weinstock had unfairly hinted that she thought Gilda had plagiarized on several occasions. "I've already written a few novels," Gilda replied, "so it's no big deal." This statement was partly true. Her bedroom closet was stuffed with bizarre stories that she hoped would someday make her famous. "How interesting," said Mrs. Weinstock, crossing her arms over her chest. "Do tell us more." Gilda chewed on her pencil, trying to think of something to say that would make Mrs. Weinstock and the entire class stop looking at her as if she were a toad that had suddenly explained it enjoyed singing opera. After a few agonizing seconds, Gilda was saved by the last school bell of the year, immediately followed by the clatter of students rushing toward the door and fleeing the building. As Gilda trudged down the hallway, she felt irritated with herself. Was her impulsive idea of traveling to San Francisco the product of a genuine psychic impulse, or was it merely a compulsive lie? Lately, Gilda had been making a genuine effort to tell the truth. At least, she had promised herself that if she did tell a spontaneous lie, she would do everything possible to make the lie actually come true. In order to maintain this resolution, she would now have to find a way to get herself from Michigan to San Francisco for the summer, a plan that suddenly seemed entirely impossible, given the fact that she had no money and that her mother would almost certainly veto the idea. "Hey! Since when are you going to San Francisco?" Gilda turned to face her best friend, Wendy Choi, who was struggling under the weight of an enormous blue backpack. "Look, Wendy, you're going to music camp, right? Do I ask you a million questions about that?" "Yes, you do. And I'm only asking because, well, you know how you are." "If you don't believe I'm going to San Francisco," said Gilda, "just call my mom and ask." Gilda knew that Wendy would never call her mother. Wendy hated getting stuck in conversations with Mrs. Joyce. "But just yesterday, you told me that you were planning to spend a few months spying on Plaid Pants at the convenience store," Wendy persisted. "You said you thought he might be a serial killer." "I wouldn't waste my time doing something that dumb," Gilda lied. In truth, Gilda had been looking forward to spying on Plaid Pants, particularly since she had just made 2 interesting discoveries. 1. Plaid Pants had a real name, Hector Flack, a name Gilda found far more scandalous than the nickname she had given him. And 2, Hector, Plaid Pants, had recently gotten in trouble for eating candy on the job. Gilda thought he might be in danger of getting fired. Lately, however, Gilda sensed that Wendy had lost interest in the neighborhood surveillance project they had started after reading Harriet the Spy back in elementary school. Wendy also seemed uninterested in the business she and Gilda had been planning to start, Psychic Investigations, Inc. While Gilda had been diligently working to develop her psychic abilities, Wendy seemed increasingly skeptical about the whole enterprise. Besides, Wendy would be spending 3 months at a music camp in northern Michigan, leaving Gilda on her own all summer for the first time. "Do you want to come over and spy on Plaid Pants just one last time before the summer?" Gilda ventured. "Or how about conducting a seance? We haven't done any psychic investigations for ages." "I can't. I've got to start packing for camp, and I haven't practiced piano nearly enough this week. We can't play these games forever, you know. We're almost in 9th grade. "Wendy, they aren't games. They're careers. Maybe for you, but some of us have to live in the real world." Gilda felt deflated. Wendy was abandoning her, and the real world was such a bore. As Gilda exited the front doors of the school, she vowed that she would find a way to get herself to San Francisco. Maybe there was a reason I blurted out that idea of going to San Francisco, Gilda thought. Maybe it really was a psychic impulse. Chapter 2. The Magic Typewriter and the Bold Letter. Mrs. Joyce rushed down the hallway of the hospital and grabbed the telephone from her supervisor's hand. "Sounds like your daughter again," said the head nurse irritably. "Hi, Gilda." Mrs. Joyce's voice rose to a high, nervous pitch over the phone. She always braced herself for either terrible news or requests for favors when one of her children called during her nursing shift. "How was the last day of school?" "Boring." "Have you put that meatloaf I made in the oven?" "Not yet." "Gilda, that meatloaf needs to go in the oven now." "Okay," said Gilda, poking the loaf of uncooked ground meat with her finger. "Boy, my feet are killing me tonight," said Mrs. Joyce, lowering her voice so that the head nurse wouldn't overhear her complaint. "They want me to work a double shift again this evening. The hospital's just been swamped, so I'm afraid it's going to be another late night for me." "We'll be fine," said Gilda. She and her brother were used to their mother's erratic work schedule and had learned to prepare dinner for themselves some time ago. "Mom, I was actually calling because I need to get in touch with a cousin of yours. That strange one who lives in San Francisco." "You mean Lester Splinter? Isn't he the one whose sister jumped off the roof of the house?" "Yes. Such a tragedy. It must have been 10 years ago at least. Could you give him a call?" "May I ask why you want me to call him?" "I need to go somewhere exciting this summer, and I'd really like to visit him." Gilda decided not to bother trying to explain the psychic impulse that was pulling her toward San Francisco and the fact that she needed to make a lie she had just told her English class come true. Mrs. Joyce sighed. "Gilda, Lester and I are not close. He's my second cousin, and I used to see him at family reunions when we were kids, but we haven't spoken in ages. I'm sorry, but it isn't realistic to ask if you can visit him in San Francisco." "But he's family, isn't he?" "Why don't you just go spend some time with Grandma Joyce if you want to visit one of your relatives?" Grandma Joyce lived only a few miles away, in a tiny house downriver in Detroit. She was the only person Gilda knew who actually owned a black and white television and who liked baking prune pies. "There's no way in hell I'm visiting Grandma Joyce," said Gilda. "She smells." This prompted a small lecture from Gilda's mother about bad language, the evils of ageism, and how, in the future, she herself might smell terrible, and how, in the event that turned out to be the case, she would hope that her own daughter would show some consideration for the elderly. "Okay, Mom, I'd better get going on my work," said Gilda, interrupting her mother. "I thought today was the last day of school." "I mean my real work."